I'm a big picture person, so it always makes sense for me if we paint the right picture to start with. So I think we should really start right at the beginning and say, you know, we're all here for ourselves. So in other words, we're here in this room today because of whatever's happened, you know, and that's what we would call self-understanding. I think self-understanding is really poorly understood. And the way I look at it is you understand self through living. In other words, you'll just keep learning about yourself as you continue to live. If you live for a very long time, that learning will continue. So in other words, we often jump on stuff that's interesting for the mind, but we forget all the time that the development that's happening is happening with this entity that we can't in any way sort of grasp, and that's just this idea of self. So you just keep that in mind as I go, because that's going to help you sort of understand where I'm coming from. And then I think the other thing that brings us here is sport. So in other words, this self is developing through the vehicle of sport. And sport is an amazing teacher for a whole range of reasons, mainly because you've got to keep turning up. You'll come up against all sorts of challenges. You'll meet some great people. And so, again, that's why you're in this room. And now we'll get to the confusing part, which is really all the inputs that go into that. So maybe you play tennis, you play golf, you play table tennis, you ride a bike. Whatever you do is you love it, but you might not even be able to say why. So one school of thought looks at skill, looks at technique, looks at strategy, and that's usually your sport type coach. Okay, and they're the things, they tend to be the things they're interested in: skill, technique and strategy. Then there's the fitness type person who's interested in training, so they're probably usually interested in training itself. They may or may not have an interest in the sport training, but most people associated here would. They're interested in load, so how to load the sport or to make the training more difficult so we get an adaptation. And that way of thinking has been really called metabolic. Because in the old days, when you were trying to work out how fit you were, you either got on a rowing ergo or a treadmill or a bike and you had your gases measured. And it said how fit you were in terms of, usually VO2 max, or your body weight divided by millilitres of O2 per minute. So someone like Cadell has got a VO2 that's around, just under 90, which is, you tend to be born that type of person. Obviously, we've all got a scope with which we're working with that we can get these adaptations. But just to say that training view is interested in that type of fitness. Now this is in some ways new, but there's the whole treatment side of things. So there's treatment, rehabilitation, motor control, and increasingly neurology. Neurology sounds like a big word, but it's really just, we're actually a body-brain, not a body and a brain. So not that many people know that the body gives the brain its information. So in other words, the brain knows nothing firsthand. The brain knows the world through the senses. It knows the body through sensation and feeling, and it knows mind through thoughts, mainly thoughts and images. So when we train, you could say we actually train and improve. We've actually got an improvement in our body-brain firing, body-brain understanding. Now, I don't believe that those three, if you like, three camps talk that well. And I think, Glenn would say, the whole role of something like this is that we actually open up a dialogue. We open up the means by which we can, these separate, so-called separate camps, because they're not really separate, can actually communicate. Now, interestingly, put up your hand if you've ever been injured. Should be pretty much everyone in the room has had an injury. So the treatment school is very good at getting you not injured. But then what tends to happen is you drop that away, you maybe stop doing your control-based exercises because you're doing a lot of load. I would say that needs to happen just as well as the load needs to happen. So in other words, you never not do control work because you're so-called I'm not injured. Does that make sense? That's got to keep going. And that actually then plugs into your ability to be more skillful and more strategic, because it's just the way the body-brain sees it. Body-brain doesn't separate strategy from a smooth movement, from the ability to actually keep that movement going, what we might call endurance. As a matter of fact, stability, which is one of my main interests, is all about having an endurance. So in other words, we can't never not be stable, otherwise we fall apart. So the stabilising function has to have endurance, just as you need endurance on a 5k run, or to play 3 sets of tennis, or to play 18 holes of golf, etc. Now, this new addition, which I haven't mentioned, which I believe needs to come into that triangle of training, skill and treatment, is recovery. Now, the main athletes who are doing recovery at the moment tend to be full-time, so in other words, they're sort of paid to play their sport. And so if you look at AFL football, recovery would almost be 50% of what they do now. So that includes hot-cold therapy, saunas, massage, increasingly meditation. Better athletes also use visualisation, but that's still seen as, oh yeah, I'd do that if I had a bit more time, or I'd do that if I knew something about it. So it has to, again, for us to feel like we're comprehensive, that really needs to come in. So the triangle really needs to become a square. So I'll just summarise that for you. Training or load, skill, technique, strategy, treatment, rehab, motor control, neurology, recovery, regeneration, meditation, visualisation. So I'll just sort of pause there and see if there's any comments, or whether that's throwing up anything for people, whether there's agreement. So what do you think? What do you think of that summary thus far?